Welcome to In Focus. I'm your host, Yesenia Taveras. Jea Street Jr. is a singer, songwriter, and artivist from Wilmington University. When he enrolled at Morehouse College with plans to become a doctor, he was so inspired by the power of music that he dropped all of his pre-med classes during his sophomore year and began to take music classes. He graduated from Morehouse with a degree in psychology, then went back to school to complete a degree in music theory and composition at the University of Delaware. He's gone from doing hundreds of performances to helping Head Start teachers integrate music into their teaching. He joins us now to share with us his journey. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. You have a phenomenal resume.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I don't know. I just kind of do what I do, and whatever happens, happens. Honestly.
Yes, definitely. But before we get into the Jea Street we see today,
yes.
I want to tackle in and dive into your early childhood upbringing, growing up here in Wilmington, Delaware. Take us back to that time.
I mean, so I was born in Wilmington, and my dad's from the city, and I actually, for the first, maybe until I was like 12, maybe 14 or so, I was in Bears. So I moved actually to the city when I was about, 14 or 15 because my dad took a job as a director of Parks and Recreations. Honestly, it wasn't that big of a change for me just because even though I didn't officially live in the city, at that point, my early years, I was always like at Hilltop Summer Camp. So it was just kind of one and the same to me. And, things have definitely changed in the city since I graduated from college. This is 20 years ago at this point. Right. But I've always just kind of loved Wilmington. And honestly, when I went away to Atlanta, that gave me a lot of perspective and made me appreciate it more now. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
And are there any experiences when you were going through Hilltop and raised here in Wilmington, going through your childhood that you might have seen that could have negatively affect you or positively affect you?
Honestly, at that age, I wasn't really thinking negative, positive. It was just kind of whatever my circumstance was. I mean, when I was, when I think specifically back about like going to Hilltop Camp, I remember just being hot. And I remember having to walk from Hilltop all the way down to Cool Springs Park. And, I remember like the chocolate milk from the free lunches and that kind of stuff. And walking back at the end of the day just hot. But I was, always comfortable in my city. I mean, my grandparents lived in the city, so it wasn't a thought of whether or not this was comfortable or safe or negative or positive. It was just, I was in the city. You know what I mean? There was no thought until I got a little bit older and could reflect and think about those experiences. It's kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah, and now you mentioned your father, Jea Street, who's a very prominent figure here in Delaware. Also, just recently had a street named after him as well.
Yeah.
Jea Street, the man, right?
Yeah, right.
So, talk to us about having this gentleman right here, not only as your father, a community activist, community leader, but you're being raised right up under him. Talk to us about that.
No, it's had a tremendous impact on me in a lot of different ways. I mean, for sure, the whole, I really am an almost 50-50 split of my mom and my dad because my mom, she's a cellist and she went to school for music and she's a musician. Okay. And my dad is obviously an activist and a politician and he's always done that. And the whole idea that I have this artivism thing is directly coming from his influence on me and him always kind of instilling in me the idea of giving back. It's just always been there. It's part of why I chose the college that I chose, and it's always there. And not just because I'm a junior. It's just these are the things that he always preached to me, and showed me in his actions that are still going on now, plain and simple.
And what was life being like as a child or a young adult of a politician?
You know what? It's even now I have to consider because we have a lot of similarities, but we're also different, and we're both wild in our own sort of way. He does a much better job, and he's more cognizant of sort of keeping the wild side not right here. And because I'm an artist and a musician, I'm like, I'll put it right in your face all the time. And it's funny because people probably think, well, do you worry about curbing yourself to, for the sake of your dad? And it's more the opposite. I'm like, I hope that he often worries about his status affecting me, but it's really me being like, I hope something that I say crazy, say online, doesn't impact me, because it's literally, there have been times where I've said something kind of far out there and it's gone to him as if he said it. I'm like, no, it was actually me. You know what I mean? So it's just those kinds of mix up at this point. But it's been it's always interesting. You know, I've always had it in the back of my brain, but at a certain point I was like, listen, this doesn't mean you're going to take it or leave it. And if you can differentiate between the two of us, cool. If not, you know what I mean?
That's
so,
right.
yeah, that's it.
And so you did mention a little bit about how he kind of inspired you to go to Morehouse.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about that.
Well, so I went to Tower Hill School since I was from the age of 4 to 18. And you know, there was literally one other black person in my class. And being at Tower Hill, there just wasn't, at that time, a whole lot of diversity. And by the time, you know, my dad did the best that he could to keep me balanced by sending me to Hilltop and doing those kinds of things. Okay. But after 18 years of it, it's like, even internally, it was like, yo, I need to find that balance. You know what I'm saying? Just on a day-to-day basis, you know, in terms of the 9 to 5, you know what I mean? Yes. I mean, 8 hours of my day, I'm a minority, you know, and that's fine. It wasn't a negative experience, but it was just like I never, you know, on a regular basis had that certain connection that I finally got when I went to Morehouse. And you know,
now for those who don't know, Morehouse is an historically black college university.
HBCU, and it gave me that sort of missing piece that I needed. And Morehouse in itself is number one of its most famous alumni is Martin Luther King Jr., and that's definitely one of my dad's heroes. So that spoke to me, and it's also another institution that is very much about giving back and paying it forward, if you will.
Yes.
So all of those things, plus the fact that I wanted to get out of Delaware and just kind of get as far away as possible to see something different, all of those factors added up to me making that decision for being my school. Yeah.
Okay. And interesting enough, you went to Morehouse with the intent of becoming a doctor.
Yeah.
And then you switched it all up and said, I love music. Talk to us about when that transition happened.
Yeah, that probably happened somewhere around, it was absolutely my sophomore year. So I was going to be a psychiatrist was the goal, because, you know, I got interested in psychology maybe around my senior year in high school. Okay. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be a psychologist. But then actually a close friend of mine's, I think uncle, was like, listen, if you're going to be a psychologist, just go ahead and be a psychiatrist, because that way you'll be able to prescribe meds too. And I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. I never had any problem with the sciences, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I started taking those classes, mainly the science classes, and I was doing fine. But bottom line is I didn't like them. I wasn't enjoying it. I was like, this isn't something I can just see myself doing for the rest of my life. You know, it was kind of boring to me. Yeah. And at the same time, I was really getting my feet wet in music in terms of, you know, I joined the Morehouse College Glee Club. And that first year was like, well, music is pretty cool. Like, this is interesting. And I started to see music as more than just like entertainment and pop kind of culture. I started to see music from the perspective of really trained musicians, and I started to see it as more of a science and more of a craft, if you will. And by the time I just specifically remember taking a chemistry test my sophomore year, and I was like, I'm not enjoying any of this. And I literally got up in the middle of the test, walked out to the registrar and was like, yo, I'm dropping these science classes and I'm just getting out of here ASAP with psychology. And I that very next semester, I like signed up for my first piano class and started taking voice lessons. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I was like, you know, the funniest thing is, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do music full time. And my parents, because up through high school, I showed no even interest in music. It was like, get out of here. I want to play football, video games, and just graduate ASAP.
Right.
And I was like, yo, Mom, Dad, I'm going to do music. And they're like, what? You can't even. What are you talking about? It was like a lunatic call. Like, it was like all of a sudden, it was almost like if I just said, you know what, right now I'm just going to join the NBA. Like, how are you going to join what are you short? What are you talking about? Like, get out of here. You know what I mean? But they came to the Glee Club tours, and we actually came to Chester at a church, and my parents came up, and I was, you know, they let me sing a solo, and my parents were like, who is this child? Like, what is, so it's one of those very weird kind of things where it's like, I stuck my foot in it to see what it was like, and found that I had an ability, and then fell in love with it, and then just kind of ran with it. So that's it in a nutshell.
And it's great that for us to hear your story, because one would think that you would have to be born with vocal skills and capabilities in order to be successful in this industry. But as we just learned, you weren't. You went and taught and learned about it. Taught yourself.
I mean, it's you know, anyone can develop a capacity for some kind of music. It might not be something that's in your heart, and that's fine. Just like anyone, it's funny. I talked to a photographer of mine, a photographer friend, who started taking like these formal drawing classes, and he was like, I didn't realize this in the same way that anyone can learn to draw. It might not be your thing, but again, music is a craft. It is an art, but there's a craftsmanship to it, from the guitar player to the person who's writing to the person who's producing. It's something that you can learn. And, your talent might not be vocal, your talent might be this, that, and the other, but it's something that anyone can develop a certain proficiency to for the most part. Like if you have just a basic ability to count a beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're musical naturally. So, yeah.
And did your parents at any point share with you their hesitation or fear that you'd become that starving artist?
Absolutely. But at the same time, they've always been very supportive. I mean, I honestly think part of the, no doubt that I'm fortunate to have had parents who are like, boy, you can do anything. You can do anything you set your mind to. And, that's not always the case. Again, I'm sure if I would have been like, I want to play professional basketball, it'd have been like, okay, this is too much. And I think that music was right on. I'm like, okay, like we'll give it a shot.
Okay.
But them being supportive certainly helped me make that decision,
And
absolutely.
it's so amazing because you took that passion that you have in your heart, you switched your classes, switched your course in life, changed the outcome of it, and then ended up taking music theory at University of Delaware.
Yeah.
For those who are unaware of what music theory is, because I am very fond of the lyrics that you use in your songs and what you express. So talk to us about music theory and how you incorporate what you've learned at University of Delaware into your music today.
Yeah, so just in terms of music theory is, with music and a lot of the arts, there's always a bit of science involved. And when you're talking just about, a vibrating string, if you cut that string in half while it's vibrating, it vibrates twice as fast. And that vibration is the sound you hear. So the pitch doubles. It goes up an octave. There's just at that level, there's just an absolute science. You could take classes on just about acoustics and the design of the building and how sound is affected by that. And then there's the art part of it. But my thought process was, if I'm going to be a musician and if I'm going to study this as a craft, even if I'm not planning on being a classical musician, I still want to have that foundation. And it sounds kind of outside the box in 2019. Quincy Jones knew theory as well as any classical musician. Miles Davis knew his musical theory as well as any classical musician. Duke Ellington, go on back. Yes. It's not an uncommon thing if you go back to the stuff that's really good, and it's something. It's an idea that, I'm kind of on a soapbox that is lost to an extent. It's not lost because there's still classes being offered, but the idea that you need to approach this as a craft and learn the formality of it is not as popular as it once was. Like Quincy Jones knew how to write for strings in a very formal manner, and this is the man who gave us Thriller. By any standard, he's a genius, and he knew his stuff. Miles Davis knew his stuff, as well as any classical musician,
yes.
and better in some ways, because he was able to improvise, which classical guys couldn't do necessarily. So it was very important for me in terms of not only learning my craft, but also in terms of just paying homage to the guys that I respect the most. Stevie Wonder knows his craft. Donny Hathaway knows his chords. He can rearrange something on the spot and write the sheets out for you. Like, you don't think about that because you don't see that part of the process. But these guys knew their craft. Yes. Just like a bridge builder knows how to build a bridge the right way. There's structure to a song. It's not just, this is how I feel.
And it's all encompassing, and it makes it for better music when you know all the different components of it.
Yes, it's no different than like you could easily compare Kobe Bryant and Quincy Jones, because in as much as Kobe could play street ball with anybody, he knew he knew the game, the science of the game too.
Yes.
So. Study your craft. You have a craft, and you know your craft.
Yes,
so,
I am on the same wavelength as you.
You don't just pick up a microphone and say, "Hey, we're doing a show today." There's pieces
there's
to this.
a process to this.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And so now, Jay, one thing about you that I find very interesting too is that you are very diverse in your style of music. So you've gone from opera to Broadway to hip hop to Italian. Take us to that journey.
So, you know, when you say like that, look, so Duke Ellington is one of my heroes for sure, and one of probably my favorite quote from him is, "There's two kinds of music. There's good and bad." You know, there are certainly, you know, there's obviously a huge difference between opera and say hip hop music, both of which I enjoy. But everything that I do is, number one, something I enjoy. And I grew up listening to everything because of my mom and my dad. My mom was a classically trained person, and my dad, you know, was nothing but James Brown. And my dad introduced me to hip hop music. Honestly, I remember him.
Oh, okay.
I remember him coming in with the Dougie Fresh and the show on record. And you know,
look at that, something I didn't know about Jea Street.
You know, and then when it started getting, you know, when hip hop changed and kind of got, you know, when like NWA got involved, you know, he was like, all right, I'm out. But that's where I kind of picked it up, and that was my space at that point.
Okay.
But no, it's just it's not such a leap for me. And again, you know, in as much as opera singing is very different to your ears than, say, Stevie Wonder, the fundamental techniques are still there the same. You know what I mean? When like people who have long-lasting pop careers sing with the right technique, and they might use that technique to produce a slightly different sound or a very different sound than, say, Pavarotti. The fundamentals are there. Like the idea of breath support and not straining is all there, you know? So it's still a technique, you know? And,
definitely. And the reason why I wanted to take the time to talk to our viewers about the music part of Jea Street is because you could have been just like any other artist and just sing wherever, perform wherever. But you are not that person. You've taken the time to be an artivist, as you say, within our community. And that's one thing I love, because we need more change in our community, and you've become that role model, if I may say, for most musicians. You've joined forces with 302 Guns Down, with all the crime and violence that's happening, not only in our city, throughout our country. You've taken initiative. These are wonderful photos here, by the way. You've taken the initiative to integrate your music, your expertise with music, and your lyrics, and expressing that to our community. Recently, you've actually performed at the fundraiser for Lil LJ. And so talk to us about how important it is for you to be the artivist in our community, and then also explain to us what Artivism is.
So, number one, it's really important. A large part of that, again, comes from my dad. And then at a certain point, just within, you know, my own experience in the city, once I moved back about 5 years ago, it just became paramount that I re-involve myself and use the gifts that I have to, you know, give back. And the idea of artivism, you know, artivism, it's art and activism. And that term, actually, you know, that's not my term. I want to be very clear about that.
Yes,
I didn't make up that term.
I thought it was, and then when I did research, I was like, oh, this is a national thing.
This is a national thing. And I saw a T-shirt, and then I did my reading up on it. It was actually something that started in the West Coast, like in LA, pretty much, by a lot of like, I think it was like Chicano, and I forget the other groups, but it was like in the 90s, like 92, 93.
Oh, that far back.
Yeah. But see, the idea of artivism has been around for centuries.
You know, never had that title.
Exactly. So Harry Belafonte, you know, he is a pure artivist. God bless him. He is someone who's always made music, but also been a part of the struggle. That he was totally in the middle of the civil rights struggle. You know, he's an intelligent guy. You know, if you go back and you look at, you know, Nina Simone, you know, she was so much about using her art to create change.
And would Bob Marley be an artivist?
Oh my God, absolutely! Like a king of artivism. You know what I mean? He's impacted communities far more than me, and made just incredible music. So he was about that life. So that's just the term that was created to kind of, you know, give it, you know, a clear sort of picture. But artivism has been going on for literally centuries. Artists have always been thought of as the dangerous ones because they'll speak out and use their power for whatever it is they think they should use it for. You know what I mean? So that's where it comes from. Yeah.
And then, like we were saying with the 302 Guns Down, you've made sure that you've become a full-time musician and part of that activism as well. Yeah. What are some of the benefits you've seen from the community being the artivist that you are?
So you're asking me what are the benefits of artivism on the community, sort of?
In itself, and just in your experience? Because me personally, when I was there at the fundraiser, it was very interesting to see how music moved the room.
And that's it. And so from my end, it's like, okay, I know in itself, just like if you listen to, say, a Bob Marley, you know, I Shot the Sheriff, that gets you think, or War, like all of those songs, or, you know, just so many different songs that I could think of. It, in the least, or even a John Lennon's like Imagine, you know, it puts you in a certain space and it makes you think, like, not only does it inspire you to, you know, just do something higher, and it might introduce you to a specific cause, but it also is like the news. It brings you information about what's going on. You know what I mean? So from my end, I knew that I was hoping that my songs just by themselves, like if I play you the song Teddy, or if I play you Bad Dude, that should be like, yo, this is not, you know, this is something that needs to be addressed. It's something that needs to be improved.
Right.
In the least, a song can do that. And then from my end, you know, because of my upbringing, honestly, it was like, okay, playing a song is cool. That's good. You know, that could impact someone in a lot of different ways. But it was like, I also need to get my hands dirty. You know what I mean? So it's like kind of you go that extra step to really participate in the process and talk to people and talk to kids and, you know, try to find out real solutions to these problems outside of me just singing. Not that singing doesn't matter, but it was like I got to do more than just sing these songs, you know. And
talking about the cause, you are very diverse, from performing at Firefly here in Dover, Delaware, to creating projects that speak to Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, and after you did the project when he was assassinated and how that affected Wilmington, Delaware, to actually participating in the march that we have here in Wilmington for Martin Luther King on his day. So talk to us about that aspect of it.
Again, it's really me trying to use my craft to impact things from any angle possible, you know? Obviously, the Firefly crowd isn't going to be particularly, at least you wouldn't think, honestly, that, you know, that might not be the place to talk about artivism and police brutality, but it's kind of not true. It's just not true, because the people who saw us perform there were like, wow, that's great. It's almost like the idea, like, it was like, oh, no one has an attention span. That's really not true. It's because that's the product that we keep throwing in front of them. But at the same time, you know, one of the biggest podcasts, one of my favorite guys is Joe Rogan. He's got a 3-hour podcast that people will watch or listen to for 3 hours. Like, it's just nonsense. It's because it's just like a short-sighted, myopic, you know, thought process. But no, people will eat Artivism up if it's presented in a good way. You know what I mean? It's got to be a good song. Like, I can't just sit here and go, oh, I don't like police. Oh, I can't stand police, which is not how I feel. But, like, if I was saying, you know, stop beating up black people, that's not a good song. It's just not a good song. You're not going to remember. It's not going to move you. The notes don't do anything for you. So you've got to still make a good song. You know what I mean? And then that's where it cuts through.
And before we leave, Jay, talk to us about how important it is to integrate music with the kids. I know you have kids of your own. I've seen just photos of you and your son and daughter at the piano. This is very touching here. Talk to us about the importance of integrating it in our schools before we leave.
You know, reaching kids from any level is easier the younger they are. And that comes from music all the way to, you know, when I'm trying to work with these kids who are on the road to trouble, the earlier we can intervene, the better, because the more malleable they are at a younger age. You know what I mean? So, you know, my kids will understand the blues and that kind of music because it's always been there. You know what I mean? And they'll have an appreciation for it because it's always been there. So the earlier we can put good food in their systems, the better.
That's
you know
the family
what I mean?
Right there.
Yeah.
And the great thing about it, as a full-time musician, I saw your wife and kids at a lot of your performances.
Listen,
so you incorporate them in part of the journey.
Absolutely. That's the same thing my dad did. It's like I was always there watching them, and I want them to feel the same way. You know, I'm hoping that one of these two ends up being a little social warrior too, who's better than me. You know what I mean?
Wonderful. Or they might call you up and say, Dad, I'm switching this up.
Whatever it is. Just maybe not basketball, but
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Yes, our pleasure. Cool. And on behalf of all of us here at WITN 22, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for watching this episode of In Focus. I've been your host, Yesenia Taveras.